The amazing history of the high heel, the height of status and style. It is claimed that the high heel was formally invented in the 16th century, specifically in 1533, when Catherine de' Medici decided to wear heels on her wedding day to Henry II, a duke and the future king of France. Catherine was only 14 and quite short, not more than 5 foot tall, and so she asked a cobbler to make her shoes that would appear much taller on her wedding day. Apparently, she wasn't really a beauty, and her husband had a tall and really pretty mistress. So Catherine wanted to dazzle the French on her wedding day. She selected a pair of 2-inch heels to make her appear slightly taller and appear to have a more towering physique. Other monarchs who would love to wear heels were Mary Tudor, who loved wearing them as high as possible, and Marie Antoinette, who famously wore a pair of 2-inch heels the day she was executed. Even though it is claimed that a woman was the first to wear a high-heeled shoe, it was the men that first made the high-heel shoe popular. They were adopted by the European aristocracy of the 1600s as a signal of status. The idea was that only someone who didn't have to work could possibly go around in such impractical footwear. These were called Louis heels, and they were often as tall as 5 inches high. The king commanded that only nobility could wear heels that were colored red, and that no one's heels could be higher than his own. It wasn't until the 1700s when women began to wear heels. And they did this in a way to sort of match the masculine power that the men had. In the late 1630s, women were cutting their hair and they were adding epaulets to their outfits. Epaulets, they were an ornament shoulder piece that were usually worn on uniforms, mainly by military officers. So women were adding all of these things to make their look more masculine. Women at this time also would smoke pipes, they would wear hats that were very masculine, and this is why they eventually adopted the heel. It was in an effort to masculinize their outfits. The lower classes also began to wear high heels, as fashions typically filtered down from the elite or the first class. You might be wondering, how did the elite respond to imitation from the lesser people or the lower class, such as women and workers? Well, first off, the heels worn by the elite became increasingly high in order to maintain upper class distinction. So this is where people could see the difference between the elite and the lower class, depending on how high the heel was. So the higher meant that they, were more powerful, more elite. And also, heels were differentiated into 2 types, fat and skinny. The fat heels were for men, while the skinny were for the women. Fast forward a few years, and the age of the Enlightenment was happening. The high heels were now seen as foolish and unmanly. By 1740, men had stopped wearing them altogether. By the time the high heel came back into fashion in the mid-19th century, photography was transforming the way that fashions and the female self-image were constructed. This led to the high heels being seen as a sort of sensual embellishment for women. The 18th century also saw heels becoming very controversial in America. The Massachusetts colony banned women from wearing them, saying that women used them to trap men, and anyone seen wearing them would be prosecuted as witches. The English Parliament also used this logic and treated women wearing heels as witches. Many critics at the time compared the high heel to the cloven hoof of the devil. It wasn't until the Roaring '20s that the heel regained its full glory again. Hemlines became much shorter, and this encouraged very high and slender heels. Both the 30s and 40s were tough times, so the heel became more moderate with lower and wider heels. At the same time, though, Hollywood gave the heel a new edge, with many actresses wearing sparkly and glittery heels, which challenged the traditional French heel. The 50s and 60s saw a revival of really high heels. Christian Dior invented the stiletto for us. He collaborated with designer Roger Vivier to develop a low-cut Louis shoe with a narrow heel. Interesting fact, the stiletto in Italian means small dagger with slender, tapering blade. Then, with the creation of the miniskirt in the 60s, heeled boots were made to enhance the look of bare legs. Heels were brought to the catwalk in the 1980s, with Manolo Blahnik stilettos making a huge impact, and the world has never looked back. Just look at all of the high heel designs that are out there today. The high heel dates back to the 16th century, but shoes, in general, date back to biblical times. The topic of shoes can definitely be integrated into the social studies curriculum. Whether you discuss the scripture where Isaiah complains about the rich and perhaps scandalous women who wore tiny bells on their feet, or if you are discussing the monarchs of the 16th and 17th centuries, shoes and high heels can definitely be made mention of in the classroom. Middle school students could choose to also create different projects, perhaps similar to this one, that sort of helps them to look deeper into the history of the high heel or the shoe. As you can see, there is so much history on high heels, and I just think it would be a really fun topic for kids to research further in the classroom.